You know, we at TFL get a lot of comments that we hate Subarus. We do not hate Subarus. The very first car I can ever remember falling in love with was our mid-1980s Subaru GL Wagon. In fact, my dad Roman has owned several Subarus over the years. It's just that the PR team really doesn't love us. And to prove that we have a passion for the brand, we went out and bought this. This is a 1978 Subaru DL. It's an awesome car, and it's probably one of the most significant vehicles you completely forgotten about.
I heard you say you found the story all tucked away in the back of the room. Been lost.
I wasn't around in the 1970s, although based on their music, I certainly wish I was. But I did have a chance to speak to a lot of people who were around in the 70s, especially those living here in Colorado, and it was definitely an interesting time for cars. Now, it's probably not much of a surprise, but here in Colorado we get a lot of snow, as does many other places around the United States. And they got a lot of snow in the 1970s as well, but they didn't deal with it in quite the same way, because today every car, it seems like, comes with all-wheel drive, from the Toyota Camry to the Nissan Altima. It's just such a prevalent thing. But back then, if you wanted four-wheel drive, you had to get a utility vehicle, like a Jeep or a Scout. And I love Jeeps and Scouts. I've actually owned several of them, but they weren't very good in the 70s, if we're being honest. A Jeep CJ5 would have been pretty compromised. They were slow, they were tippy, they were quite unsafe, they were cold in the wintertime, they were hot in the summertime. They weren't anything like the typical sedan that you'd go out and buy. And speaking of typical sedans that you would go out and buy, like the Chevrolet Caprice, which was the best-selling car in '78, or a Ford Granada, or any of the list of American rear-wheel drive boats, those cars were fine, but they were horrendous in the snow. So what you ended up with was a small percentage of the population with basically these tractors driving around, cruising along the streets, and then a huge percentage of the population driving in the snow with one wheel furiously spinning in the rear, trying to get traction with any kind of chains they could find to get you to school. And then Subaru came along. This Subaru took the good old four-wheel drive technology from a truck and blended it with the comfort and refinement of a passenger car, creating something truly special that revolutionized the way we thought about cars. Like we talked about, four-wheel drive in passenger cars wasn't really a thing. I mean, I know Jensen did kind of a limited production high-performance thing, but in terms of a car that normal people could afford, this was it. And it doesn't work like your traditional modern four-wheel drive. It's not a hands-free system. Instead, the way it works is you drive along on dry pavement every day in front-wheel drive, just like any other front-wheel drive car. It isn't until you hit rocks or mud or snow that you would engage the rear end, and you would do so by pulling this lever backwards. And now I have permanent four-wheel drive, much like putting a truck into 4-high. But you can't drive this car in four-wheel drive on dry pavement because it locks the rear drive shaft in at the same speed as the front, essentially, meaning it will crab and create all sorts of issues on road. So then what you have to do is put it back in a two-wheel drive when you hit the dry surface again. Now this may seem like a little bit of a pain in the butt compared to all of the on-demand systems of today, but back then it was super revolutionary. Compared to the 1970s trucks of the day, this was so much better. Like, for example, my F-250 and a lot of the Jeeps of the era, you've got a big lever and you gotta muscle it into four-wheel drive, and that lever's gonna fight you, it's gonna crunch, it's gonna grind, and once you finally convince it to engage the front axle, you have to get out in the snow and scrape off the locking hubs. They're gonna be packed with ice, and then you gotta force it into four-wheel drive, at which point you can get along with your way. Well, the Subaru completely eliminated all of that. When it's pouring down snow, you just gently pull that lever back and off you go into the unknown. There was no wrestling with levers, there was no fighting with ice on hubs. This was so much easier. And yes, I know someone in the comments is going to talk about how the Wagoneer had a more sophisticated four-wheel drive system that was less clunky, but let's be honest, Wagoneers in the 70s were expensive, they were big, and the fuel economy was so bad, you might as well have just left the thing plugged into the oil fields of Saudi Arabia, because that was the only way you were going to get to work. The next bizarre thing about the Subaru is just the design, and it's either something you really love or really hate. I personally love it just because it's weird. In the front end you've got 4 quad headlights, then the belt line you've got this bizarre little curve in, and the rear end looks like it's been rear-ended at about 800 miles an hour. Overall, it's just crazy. But the best part of it is it's really small, and yet so huge on the inside. Let me demonstrate by pulling up an incredibly small new car. This is a new Mini. It is the smallest Mini you can buy, and I am actually astonished. Alright, so the Mini is about 151 inches long from the front to the back. What about the 4-door station wagon Subaru? About 156 inches long, so that's a difference of that much. Let's see what that means in terms of interior volume. This is the trunk in the Cooper S, and as you should expect, it's very small. In fact, I'm kind of a string bean, but there's no way that I'm going to be comfortably squeezing myself into this trunk. Now, of course, you can fold the seats down. I could get in there, but certainly not going to be using this as a camping car. So we talked about the Subaru. It's about this much longer. About this much, and look at the trunk space. It's just enormous. I mean, I can easily fit back here, and then I use this little dial. I can fold the seats completely flat in some cases. It's just amazing how much room they were able to squeeze into the Subaru, and that's even before we talk about the rear seats. All right, rear seat in the Mini. Let me scoot this back to where I had it in my driving position. Right about there. Oh, geez. So first of all, getting into the Subaru is much easier because of course it has 4 doors, and the back seat, even though it's not huge, is in my opinion a little bit better than that of the Mini. This seat is all the way back, as is this one, and yes, it's not super comfortable, but you can easily fit 5 people in here fairly comfortably, and headroom is also pretty good. So even though this is by no means as good as a new Outback, it still is a heck of a lot more usable than the Mini. And then we get to the width difference, which is just astronomical. I'm going to go from the edge of the tire to the edge of the tire on both vehicles.
Keep going, yes.
The Mini is about 66 inches wide, which is pretty wide overall.
Keep coming, yes. Little back, yes.
The Subaru is just 57 inches wide, almost 10 full inches narrower than that Cooper. So it's just incredible how much space they were able to cram into this small little Japanese station wagon. It's about this much longer than the Mini, but the trunk space is enormous in comparison. The rear seat is better, and it's even narrower. Of course, there are reasons that new cars have gotten so much bigger, primarily crash worthiness. I would much rather get into any kind of accident with the Mini than the Subaru, but I do think that modern cars have just gotten too big. Most vehicles in the mid to late 70s had huge, inefficient, gas-guzzling V8s, which were clogged with catalytic converters and other very inefficient emission controls at the time. Subaru did not do any of that. This has a flat 4, a Boxster 4, just like a new Subaru. It is carbureted, and it is absolutely tiny. 1.6 liters is all you got. You can actually see the engine sits entirely in front of the front axle. It's only about this wide and about this long. You can pick it up easily with 2 guys, only about 67 horsepower. But Subaru was able to get these vehicles to run so efficiently and so cleanly that these never came equipped with catalytic converters. They just used suction pumps and EGR valves to get this vehicle running clean, which was hugely monumentally important at the time. Other weird things underneath the hood. You can't ignore the spare tire. I love the way they did this. This is the spare tire that doesn't live in the rear, it doesn't live underneath. It lives right behind the engine. Your jack is over there. Pull this out, you have great access to the front transmission transaxle system. Man, these are so easy to work on. Everything is easy to get to. Great engineering feats. Not very fast, these will top out about 80, 85, but surprisingly efficient and fast enough for what you need here. All right, here we go out on the road in the 78 Subaru DL, and the first thing you notice is that this car really does drive like just about any modern car. I had a 78 Lincoln for a while, and that really drove like an antique. This is just fine. It just drives like a normal modern car. The steering is quick and responsive, the gear change is fast, the brakes are good, and the engine, even though it's not a speed demon, it goes pretty well, and it has this really cool boxer rumble. Now, speaking of engines, this is a unique little unit. Plenty of power to keep up with traffic, and the transmission is just so tight. I mean, it is a great little transmission, and it's quick to use. It flicks through the gears well. It's just a good driving car. There's just nothing else to say about it, really. Subaru's catchphrase in the 1980s was inexpensive and built to stay that way. And these cars were very affordable, but they gave you a lot of options that you might find on some premium offerings, such as these doors, which are pretty unique in that the window glass is actually frameless. So there's no border here around the window, it's all just one piece, and when you roll it down, you just have the door remaining. That's pretty cool stuff that was somewhat unusual on inexpensive cars back in the day. The interior in this Subaru is pretty basic, but the steering wheel I think is hilarious. First of all, it's blue, which is very 70s, and it also has these bolsters, but unlike modern bolsters, which are elegantly sculpted into the full width of the steering wheel, on these Subarus, it was just a plastic extension that you can kind of jam your thumb in here. Now, if you look at the manual, Subaru actually refers to these cars as the 1600 series because there were a number of different body styles that shared the same architecture. There was a 2-door sedan, a 4-door sedan, the front-wheel drive station wagon, the 4-wheel drive station wagon, something called a hardtop, which was a sporty trim, and then something called the open-top MPV, which was a Subaru Brat. And depending on the trim, you would have different options. Now, this 4-wheel drive station wagon has an AM-only radio, which still works brilliantly, and it sends its audio through one speaker. Now, if you got the sporty hardtop, you would have an AM and FM radio, and something as decadent as a clock. Now, of course, this one wouldn't dare have a clock, so instead they just give you a little plastic patch panel. Here are the gauges in the Subaru DL 1978. They do some interesting things. So first of all, you put the key in and you turn it to on, and it will buzz for 6 seconds to let you know to fasten your seatbelt. Take a listen. Now, the idea with that is you would fasten your seatbelt before turning the car on so you didn't hear that buzz whatsoever. But to start it up, you've got the key in the ignition. Just gonna give it a little bit of gas. And there she goes. No issues whatsoever. So you've got a parking brake warning, a charge warning, oil, fasten seatbelts, and then you also have a light for your 4-wheel drive, which turns on when you engage 4-wheel drive, and a little warning for your rear defrost, which is located just down here. And that is all. Those are all the gauges on the Subaru. Very functional though. No tachometer. You had to get a sport trim for that. Just a couple warning lights, a speedometer, and 2 gauges for your fuel and temperature. Here in the Subaru, we noticed 2 interesting things. This switch here is for your rear wiper, and you can push it in to engage the squirter. And then you've got this little warning that says, do not use 4-wheel drive over 50 miles an hour. This really was a basic 4-wheel drive system, and going over 50, Subaru says it would start to shake and stutter, not cause harm to the drivetrain, but it would be very unpleasant. So they recommend, if you're going fast, to stick it back into front-wheel drive, just so you have the most comfort possible. Not all station wagons in 78 were 4-wheel drive, a lot of them were front-wheel drive, and if you got a front-wheel drive one, you didn't get a rear window washer, but because this one's the 4-wheel drive model, you do. Except, take a look at this. This is your fill bag. It really is just a bag with a little pump on it, and that will send power up through the nozzle to squirt the rear window. How funny is that? Usually you see these in like old American cars in the front, but in the Subaru they give you one in the front and one in the rear for your washer nozzles. This is pretty interesting too. I really miss these on the newer cars. These are rub strips that existed across the entire length of the vehicle, and these greatly reduced the number of scuffs both received and given in tight parking lots. Now the fuel filler here has this funny little knob that you have to turn to open it. It's spring-loaded, and there's your fuel filler cap. I also love this roof rack with this fake wood trim along the side. This is so cool, it's so vintage, and the nice thing is because these cars are very low by modern standards, you can easily put stuff up here, get to bikes and canoes, and perhaps even rooftop tents nowadays. Love this system. This little car has these adorable little mirrors. Most cars in the 70s had tiny mirrors. I don't know why they were so small back then, but look, they're seriously about a finger tall, maybe a finger and a half wide. They don't do a whole lot, but they are very elegant and very cute. There is almost nothing sporty whatsoever on this old Subaru, but this is a one exception. These are functional hood vents that allow heat to escape the engine bay. Oh, they look so cool. I love how they're slanted forward, and there's one on each side. I'm really excited about the series, partially because I love this car. It's got just 59,000 original miles, and I know that because they're documented. In fact, I was looking up reviews on these old Subaru DL wagons, and it turns out our friends at Jalopnik did one in 2012 of a blue station wagon in Boulder, Colorado, and it was this exact same car. They actually had the chance to interview the original owner, who was 90 at the time of that story. So she bought this car brand new back in 1978 up in Washington, and she bought this car because she served in the Army Corps in World War II and drove around in the old Willys Jeeps. She loved four-wheel drive, but she didn't want to have to get out and lock hubs. So she bought this car brand new in Washington and then moved to my hometown of Boulder, Colorado in 1980. And this car has lived in South Boulder for its entire life, just about, which is absurd. She rode the bus a lot, she kept very good care of this vehicle, and eventually she just got too old for it and passed it on to a local Subaru repair shop called Subaru Repair, which is hugely popular here in our city. They owned it as a show car for about 8 years before selling it off to the previous owner, who registered it in New Mexico even though it lived in Boulder, and then we bought it from that previous owner for $6,000. And you gotta wonder, that sounds like a lot of money, but there's a reason we did it. You're probably wondering, if these cars were so unique and so revolutionary, why don't you ever see them on the road? Well, a couple of reasons. These were bought for snowy climates, typically, the four-wheel drives. They were used hard, they were put away wet because they were affordable, and they rusted away immediately. So most of these cars just completely disappeared from the roads altogether. And that's why this one costs more than you'd expect, because you simply don't see 70s four-wheel drive Subarus anymore. They just rotted away. In fact, I recently checked Craigslist and I could only find 2 others in the entire country for sale, and they are all so rusty. This one is original paint called Shiny Blue. It's in fairly good nick. I mean, it certainly has some stuff we can address, and it's going to be a great project because we're going to take this little vehicle to Moab. We're going to go on an epic road trip across some dirt roads through the Canyonland National Parks. Now look, we started this video by saying that we love Subarus, and it's true, we do. But I am personally a little bit disappointed in the direction the company has gone. Because back in the 70s when this car was new, it totally transformed the way a lot of people thought about transportation, especially in snowy environments. It was one of the first all-wheel drive passenger cars, boxer engine. It was affordable, but it could hold so much space in a tiny package. It was groundbreaking. The new Subarus, I feel like, have kind of lost their way. They're just somewhat typical CVT-powered all-wheel drive wagons. I want to see them push the envelope like they did way back in the 1970s. Way back when you had a manual transmission and a good old-fashioned four-wheel drive system, because this is one special car and I'm here to prove it to you.
This week on the TFL Studios, we have a lot of cool car and truck content coming up for you. On TFL Truck Channel, we have a cool off-road video with a Hummer H2, and of course, Truck Madness coming up in May. Then on TFL Off-Road, Steven is cooking up an amazing video featuring the Kawasaki KRX, followed by TFL Classics, where you will see the latest at-home edition featuring a really nice Mercedes. On TFL Car, we have this featured, which is Loveland Trials with a brand new Honda CR-V and a Toyota RAV4 hybrids.
The combined EPA rating on the CR-V is 38. The combined EPA rating on the Toyota is 40.
Now in this video, we're gonna find out which one of the two is gonna get the best fuel economy. We're also gonna review them, and at the end, we're gonna say which one we should buy. That's quite the discrepancy we have there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so well, there you have it, Tommy. So, wow, yeah.
And of course, TFL Now channel is where you'll find all the latest and greatest news from the automotive world. Check it out.
As always, this is Tommy with the TFL Classics. Head over to tflcar.com for the latest and greatest in new and used classic Subaru reviews.